On today's podcast episode, we're going to wrestle through a question I think is really cool. And it's a really good thing to think about because I think it comes from a world that we're currently living in the West, where we just struggle with what is truth. And because we struggle with what is truth, we don't know if we can trust things, right? So this question out of it is the question, is the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is it a biography? Is it propaganda? Or is it just something completely new that we haven't talked about before?
Yeah, so the Gospels, you mentioned Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, those were, people's accounts. So Matthew was a disciple. Mark was kind of around the disciples and the whole thing there. Luke was a doctor, a historian that checked things out, and then John was a disciple also. So they're all kind of around that. I had somebody tell me one time that this was the way we read the New Testament, and it makes a lot of sense to me, and I've been trying to read the New Testament through this lens a little bit. That we take the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, we read them as discipleship journals. So these four individuals, Matthew and John, two of the disciples, then Mark and Luke that were adjacent to or around, historians with it, they are journaling what happened. This is what I said. This is what Peter said. This is what Jesus did. This is what happened next. This is what the teaching was. This was the miracle. They're discipleship journals. This is what it looks like to follow Jesus right here. Then the book of Acts, because we got to go further than that, really, to put it all into context. The book of Acts is discipleship history. It's the beginning of the church. Now we have the journals first, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, placed first in the New Testament, and we see based on the journals that this is what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus, to be with Jesus. Then the book of Acts is the growth of the church as they tell other people. We see the history of the day of Pentecost, baptizing all these people, the persecution coming, Saul, the scattering, the church is beginning to grow, Peter going and preaching, Paul going and preaching, all these things beginning to happen. The history of discipleship. And then you see in the later part of the New Testament, you see some letters in there. First and Second Corinthians, you have Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, the letters to Timothy and Titus and Hebrews and all these things going on there. These are discipleship encouragement. These were all written to churches that had grown out of the history of the book of Acts. They were all trying to live in line with the things that we see in the journals, the Gospels, and they're trying to live this way. And Paul, Peter, and others are saying, this is your encouragement. Do this, try this, do this thing here. And then we get to Revelation, which is discipleship struggles. There's an enemy, and the enemy wants to destroy. In fact, the dragon's been pursuing since the beginning of time. There was this war in heaven. There's struggles along the way. But, for those who stay faithful, here's the reward. And we see the end come right there. And so if we read the New Testament through that lens right there, that makes the Gospels almost like a sneak peek at four individuals' journal of following Jesus.
Yeah, I love that. And the gospel literally is a Greek word that is called euangelion, and it means good news. What is the good news? It's the journal entries of these guys who had firsthand accounts of Jesus, the good news of Jesus. So every time you read the Gospels, remind yourself that Matthew followed Jesus. Mark was a guy named John Mark, who was a disciple of Peter. He is also mentioned throughout the books, some of the Gospels. And then you also have Luke, who is a friend and companion of Paul, who was the first eyewitness to the things of Jesus, and he looked for more eyewitnesses to write his stuff down. And John, who is also an apostle. They are eyewitness testimonies to the events of the good news of Jesus.
That's right.
Church, until we see each other again, you are sent. Have a good day.